From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The prosecution in the New York hush money trial of Donald Trump nears the culmination of its case as the president's former fixer Michael Cohen takes a stand against his old boss. Meantime, voters in West Virginia and Maryland go to the polls on a primary day with particular consequences for this fall's Senate races. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Mene Ukwe-Barua. Prosecutors in the New York trial of Donald Trump told the judge recently that it's possible they could rest their case this week, turning things over to the defense after getting testimony from potentially their last big witness, that is Michael Cohen. He is, as a reminder, the man who made the $130,000 hush money payment to Stormy Daniels in 2016, who was then reimbursed and then some by Donald Trump throughout 2017, leading to the business records, the invoices and checks and so forth that Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg says were criminally falsified. Cohen was called to the stand yesterday in the Manhattan courtroom. It's continuing today, just about to go into cross-examination as we are taping this. And Kim, the trial is not televised. Transcripts are delayed by a day, but there are already reports dribbling out from the media that are present in the courtroom. And is there anything specific that has jumped out at you, Kim, from the testimony that has been presented by Michael Cohen?
Sure. A couple of things. And one thing I would note, I would argue that not just maybe the prosecution's last big witness, but when you step back, their only real witness in some ways. There was obviously a lot of attention on Stormy Daniels and her testimony. We can debate why she was put on stand. It seems to me that she was done to establish her own credibility, as it were, and I guess to further cement the argument that this was indeed a hush money payment, although nobody really disputes that. Michael Cohen is important because, in a way, the argument about this falsification of business records, he's the person central to that, and indeed, that's one of the things that came out in the trial. I'd note up front, this was my biggest impression, is from what we can hear from the courtroom, is that Michael Cohen is playing this very smart. He has a reputation he has in the past of being a bully, a bit of foul mouth, quite bombastic. He can get angry easily. Reporters are describing his performance on the stand as instead very deliberately serious and sober, very much attempting to present himself as a credible witness, which is going to be very important because the Trump team is going to attempt to tear down that credibility. And Cohen has a lot of issues in that, he's guilty of lying to Congress. He's been indicted for other lies and convicted of other lies. So he's not the kind of perfect witness that you'd want as a prosecution. The other thing that stood out, obviously, is he went into some detail about this payment. And I think the most important aspect of what he argued is the claim that this payment was indeed made to Stormy Daniels entirely for the purpose of helping Donald Trump's campaign. He claimed that there was conversations in which he asked Donald Trump about this, asked if this was something he was concerned about in terms of Melania, because this is something that the defense is going to argue, that there were other reasons for Donald Trump to want Stormy Daniels to remain quiet. You can't necessarily claim it was a campaign issue. Michael Cohen suggested that that was an afterthought for Donald Trump, that this was all about the campaign. And he also described a meeting that he was at in the former CFO of the Trump organization, Alan Weisselberg, in which they discussed the amounts and how the payment would be structured, and that Donald Trump was at that meeting, and therefore also suggesting not just that this was done for the campaign, but that Donald Trump had intimate knowledge of it.
To underline a point that Kim made about the importance of Michael Cohen as a witness, I think that has been true. That's something that has also struck me reading through transcripts of some of these previous days of testimony. For example, the prosecution called Jeffrey McConney, who was a former controller of the Trump organization and is now retired, And he went through some very specific details about how the Trump accounting system called MDS worked, the computer program they used to track payroll and expenses and so forth. They went through the process of getting checks signed, but McConney did not himself have direct knowledge of President Trump's discussions, conversations about the repayment to Michael Cohen, his state of mind, any intent that he may have had. And so let me just read a piece of the transcript by the Trump Organization controller here. You didn't have any reason to believe that President Trump understood the details of MDS. MDS, again, is this accounting program. Correct. You did not talk to President Trump about the events that you just described. I did not. You did not talk to him about those events in 2016, 2017, 2018. Never. We got to the point where he was asking about whether the repayment to Michael Cohen, one of the prosecution's argument is that because that amount was grossed up, that amounts to tax fraud. And they asked the Trump Organization controller, you don't have any knowledge about how Michael Cohen filed his taxes, and it's his obligation to report those correct amounts to taxing authorities. And he said yes. And so, Monet, it is striking the extent to which the prosecution's case here rests on Michael Cohen, who may be the only witness that the jurors are going to hear from, who says he has direct knowledge of what President Trump was told, what happened in those meetings where they decided how to structure this repayment for the payoff to Stormy Daniels. And this is a witness, I should add, that has big credibility problems. And there's been suggestions by a federal judge that he lied under oath when he pleaded guilty.
Absolutely. I think every single witness who the prosecution has called up until Michael Cohen has essentially been helping to build out the narrative that Trump was concerned about the impact that his relationship with Stormy Daniels might have on the election, and that he decided to take action to make sure that she wouldn't be able to speak publicly. There hasn't been anyone else who has testified about the actual substance of the charges, which are that Trump falsified business records by reimbursing Michael Cohen for his payment of hush money to Stormy Daniels and recording that as a different type of expense, which is what he's actually charged with and what the prosecution must prove to the jurors. I do think that Michael Cohen helped advance that case by saying that all of these decisions are being cleared with Trump, by echoing the fact that Trump was taking steps to make sure that Stormy Daniels couldn't damage his campaign, etc. But I do think it's also worth remembering that Michael Cohen in his testimony did not specifically say that Trump was responsible for how the reimbursement was structured or how it was recorded. He said that all of these decisions were cleared with Trump, that he had intimate knowledge of what was going on, and that he ultimately was the person who decided that Stormy Daniels would be paid off. But I don't believe that he ever told jurors in his testimony that Trump decided how this was going to be recorded and was directly behind a scheme to falsely misrepresent exactly what those payments were, which again is what the prosecution has to prove to the jurors. Now, is that going to matter? It might not in the end if you have a jury who believes that Trump was behind a shady move to keep Stormy Daniels quiet, that he lied about exactly what his intention was for nefarious reasons. They're basically trying to assassinate Trump's character and portray him as being involved in a broader conspiracy and paying very little attention to the letter of the law and the charges that he's specifically attached to. And so it might be enough to just have Michael Cohen go on the stand and rehearse all the different bad things that Trump did. But it does seem to leave an opening in cross-examination for the defense to come out and say, you haven't proven that Trump is actually guilty of falsifying these business records. Michael Cohen hasn't specifically said that he was ordered to record these payments in this way, etc. And so there's quite a lot still left open in the way that the prosecution has gone about this case so far.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. I do think that the testimony of Michael Cohen has advanced the prosecution's case in one sense, and that is making it more difficult potentially for Donald Trump to argue that he had mixed or non-political motives for approving this hush money payment to Stormy Daniels in the lead up to the 2016 election. There's been some discussion about that. Donald Trump was a public figure already at the time with a public-facing business, including hotels and golf courses. So he could have made that kind of a non-disclosure agreement in order to protect his business interests. He could have done it to protect his family interests. And so I think the prosecution, part of what they're doing with Cohen's testimony is to try to cut off that line of defense. So this is a piece of what Michael Cohen said. He wasn't thinking about Melania. This was all about the campaign. I said to him, how's things going to go with upstairs? And the reply from President Trump, according to Michael Cohen, is don't worry. How long do you think I will be on the market for? Not long, unquote. He also said that President Trump was worried that this would be a total disaster. Women are going to hate me. Guys may think it's cool, but this is going to be a disaster for the campaign. And Kim, I think that's important for the prosecution because remember the theory that they have made. They have made the argument that President Trump approved this hush money payment, one, because he was worried about his political campaign, and two, that doing so amounted to a donation, a campaign donation over the legal limits from Michael Cohen to the Trump campaign. And so I do think it's helpful for the prosecution here that Cohen is backing up their story on number one. But it still seems to me that we are left with number two. We are left with some sort of case that needs to be built that this was a campaign finance crime or that President Trump thought of it as it was happening as a campaign finance crime. Or, by the way, the second theory, which is that this amounted to tax fraud. I think we're still waiting for anybody to say President Trump was informed that this might have tax implications for Michael Cohen if we structured the repayment this way. And he said, that'll be fine. Go ahead. I think we're still waiting on any sort of direct testimony that goes to this intent.
And it would seem that the prosecution is leaving out there the possibility of many different routes that they could potentially present, for instance, a closing argument to the jury about what that second crime is. I would note in one very interesting aspect of the Michael Cohen testimony was there was a piece of it in which prosecutors asked him about his interaction with the Federal Election Commission. And he testified that he had intentionally misled the FEC about this payment in order to protect Donald Trump. That would suggest that they might try pressing on this campaign finance argument. But there was also a lot of questioning, too, about the intent of this and the amounts, and was it designed in order to give him back, to plus him up because of the tax penalty. So there's still a lot hanging out there. I would argue the biggest problem they have, though, and it's not just the tenuousness of whatever the second crime is, but just to round back, it isn't just the problem that Michael Cohen is a problematic witness, okay? That he is someone that has a history and is admitted to having lied. And by the way, can I just say as a side note, I feel so sorry for this jury. I mean, this is fundamentally going to be a trial about who do you believe more, with a bunch of people that have all been caught out from not necessarily being truthful over time, from Stormy Daniels to Michael Cohen to potentially Donald Trump. So they're going to have to weigh all that in there. But one of the problems is not just his credibility, but the fact that the jury is also being asked to believe some very specific testimony from a guy with little credibility about a very sparsely attended meeting between only 3 people. This is essentially Michael Cohen's word against, in the end, Donald Trump's defense team's word. And I would note, curiously, for a guy that has a lot of tape recordings about a lot of conversations he had over the time and other people, from phone calls to recordings of meetings, there isn't one of this particular event, or at least not one that we've been made of so far. And I would wager that Donald Trump's defense team is going to push on that pretty hard.
Meantime, President Trump is still running a campaign for president in November and weighing who he might pick as a running mate. And notable that a must-go place on the Veep Stakes tour now is this Manhattan courtroom. We have had Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, and former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, all in Manhattan in recent days. Let's listen to a montage of what they said outside the courthouse.
Michael Cohen is the prosecution's star witness. This guy is a convicted felon who admitted in his testimony that he secretly recorded his former employer, that he only did it once, allegedly, and that this was supposed to help Donald Trump. Does any reasonable, sensible person believe anything that Michael Cohen says? I don't think that they should, and I actually think that his testimony is going to hurt with any reasonable juror, and hopefully we have a few of those.
The American people have already acquitted Donald Trump because the things that they're concerned about, inflation, crime, the border, the economy, all of these things, President Trump is leading by huge double digits versus Joe Biden. And the sooner that this scam trial can be concluded, the sooner that the president can get back to getting out, campaigning, and talking to the American people.
This is a sham. This is not the United States of America. This is some third-rate banana republic. If this were happening in another country, we would be laughing at them as a sham democracy. I am ashamed as an American citizen.
Monet, what do you make of this? Notable that Donald Trump has been, to my eye, observing the gag order on him by the judge, saying that he can't attack witnesses, but he probably enjoys standing next to some of those folks as they do it for him.
Yeah, I think that Trump understands how to make the most of the moment. He has loved to call attention to the gag and how it restricts his ability to campaign effectively whenever reporters ask him questions as he steps out of the courtroom. And it doesn't surprise me that he decided that I can put a call out to my allies in the Republican Party, VP hopefuls, and also Speaker Mike Johnson, and say, hey, come up here if you like, and you can speak on my behalf. It'll be a good media moment. And so Trump is enjoying this entire process and wants to conduct a loyalty check with other members of the Republican Party. For those who are campaigning to be vice president, it certainly makes sense because this is going to be a major theme of Trump's campaign, the idea that President Biden has conspired with Democrats throughout the country to attach these charges to him in an attempt to destroy his candidacy. They're going to have to be repeating that line again and again on the campaign trail, and so they might as well get some practice in, and Trump will get an opportunity to see who's able to most effectively help him sell that message. But I do think that it's good politics for the Republican Party broadly. They are going to be running with Trump in November, whether they like it or not, and they have to make the case, even to moderate voters or voters who are just beginning to turn in, that these charges are politically motivated, which there's good evidence that that's the case. So showing up to New York and making clear that they stand with Trump against these charges and making that case is something that's going to potentially help the prospects of the entire party if they're trying to keep the House and take the Senate as well.